very short on time, so I'm gonna roll right into the wrap up. Again, at the end, we'll open it up for questions, and we didn't have time to really go over the incident detail for this. Kyron typically likes to demonstrate that for you all to show you where to look at for information. And I apologize, but we're short on time. So just a quick summary. The end of year data, both 3 and 4, is reflective of the entire academic year. End of year 4 requires the submission of the SPED, the SSRV, and the PSTS from your special education data systems. You should know that previously disabled IVRs, those are your submission errors, and CVRs, those are your certification errors from Fall 1, will be reactivated. And so many of you are facing those challenges of resolving these errors now. The discipline file is broken down into 3 different file types. So if you have MPS schools, you want to, we did provide a guide for them, and there's also a training for them. But again, this is the reason why I suggest you input this data into your student information systems first, prior to trying to upload it to CalPads. The discipline reports that are relevant for special ed and students with disability are 7.16, 7.17, and 7.18. However, your students with disability are featured on other reports, and so if you're doing a, an intensive or exhaustive audit, you may need access to LEA level any report from 710 to 718. 710 to 718 are your incident reports. And then again, new IVRs and CVRs will affect the incidents as well, not just end of year 4. So end of year 3 has new errors. Here's a link to the MPS training that we did in December. And then, of course, we want to always emphasize that this is a collaborative effort. You need to communicate and coordinate with your SIS counterparts, your SELPA, your data stewards, your administration. And so, as a reminder, SELPA and the data collection certifier are emailed if either party approves or disapproves a revision. So if you have those specific roles, SELPA roles or a data collection certifier role, changes to the revision will be emailed to you. And also, end of year 3 and 4 have 2 levels of approval, and both the LEA and the SELPA must approve the revision for it to be considered certified. And then a quick checklist. You want to ensure that services have been submitted for your students on active IEPs, IFSPs, and ISPs. Ensure that students who have received parental consent for evaluation that were enrolled in your LEA between the academic year are represented in your child count. So perhaps they hadn't yet had an active plan, but the consent was given. You want to make sure that if they don't have the record, that the pending status is reported, right? We want to account for the child find. Ensure that your special education program exits are populated for students who are no longer eligible for services. If they're still eligible, of course, you don't populate any program exit date. Make sure that you review the DSEA or the SIA or the District of Special Education Accountability extract because it has implications on the California School Dashboard. And then ensure that you submit that PSTS record. These are students who left post-secondary education last year, the 18-19 school year. In the year 3 checklist, you just want to make sure that you review your students with disabilities and identify any students that were involved in incidents of restraint, seclusion, or statutory offenses. You want to make sure that your MPS schools are reporting the data. You might have to be involved in the share of data and coming up with the plan for the share of data. Remember, it's personal of nature, and so that you want to send encrypted electronic messages back and forth so that we can maintain that data is secure. Again, the link, and if you go to the CalPads resource page, there's an MPS PowerPoint, and there's a resource guide for them, so that may help. And then the duration of days should reflect each result And so a student that may be suspended and expelled would have 2 results, and the duration of days in each record reflects. One would reflect the days of suspension, the other would reflect the days of expulsion. And so here are the suggested milestones, right? And now is the 12th of June, right? And so we're here on the second step. And so not only should you be completing the data population in your local systems, right? You should be in the process of submitting your files, right? So you should be submitting your SPED records and your SSRV records. I don't know if you're having a meeting, if the students are still affecting changes, but you want to submit that data for the year. Hopefully that it says 6/15, but certainly if it has to wait until the end of your school year, I don't know when your school year ends, when your school year is completed, you want to have finished your data submission or shortly thereafter. I don't know what your stopping point is, but it's really reflective of your stopping point. But if it's between the middle of the year, between the middle of the month and the end of the month, you'll be in a great position to start resolving certification errors and reviewing snapshot reports and updating records as needed, right? Because we find that this is an iterative process, so we correct a certification error, then go back, correct another one, and we whittle it down. And so if you are in the position where you can be reviewing reports between the beginning and middle of July, you would be in a great position, right? You can send these to local data stewards, site leaders, and administrators for approval. And once you've given them time to look at the report, you can go ahead and approve that those snapshot revisions, and that gives your SELPA time to review the reports and suggest any amendments if there are discrepancies, and then you can certify by July 31st. Certainly, we do give you the month of August, or up until the 28th, to make minor adjustments and amendments, but the final deadline is 8/28. One thing about the suggested milestones is this is a timeline that will help you meet the deadline. However, your local situation, the availability of your staff, and your access to district resources probably weighs more heavily than any suggestion we can make. So if your drop dead due date is June 30th, there's nothing we can do about that. You all are adults. You have to prioritize your workload as you see fit. And then we just want to, make sure that you take learning opportunities from the submission of this data, because many of you did work with Fall 1. You know the challenges, you know the successes, so you want to learn from that submission window. And then you want to use this slide here as a reference to see what you need to consider. Perhaps you haven't thought about what your responsibility is going to be for end of year 3, or what do you need your SIS data coordinator to do for end of year 4. You want to be able to leverage your experience from your previous submissions to be successful. And who's going to be available to you, what are your resources at the LEA level, when July and August come, right? Can you request access, or can you, explain to your administrator why you need certain personnel to be responsive to you, so on and so forth, right? And so, just think about, as you're going into end of the year, all that's required of you and all that you're going to need before people are unavailable. And so then resources, part of the reason why we gave this training is not everyone has access to Bridge. However, 2 accounts per LEA are available. So talk with your SIS data coordinator, especially if you're at a smaller LEA. Most likely there will be an account that can be assigned to you. If not, we post all the trainings at the CSIS YouTube channel, right? And that's here. And then the CalPADS user manual is the only document that's official that you're not going to find on this system documentation page. However, these 2 bottom links will give you access to the user manual, the data guide, the code set, the error list, the CFS, all those official documents. And so how do you get support? Because this was an overwhelming informational training, right? First and foremost, use the web form, the link at the top. That's the fastest way to have your questions answered. The service desk is manned by CSIS staff. However, we can always route your requests to the CDE. Brandy, Shiloh, Joe, and the rest of the CDE involved with special ed tickets are providing their expertise and their knowledge. And also it provides us with identifying known issues. Sometimes your problems are due to system functionality or a bug, or sometimes business rules need to be amended and guidance, right? And so we need that communication from you all. You can contact the service desk via email and phone, but there's a delay. These things are transcribed and queued up, so the web form is always the fastest way. Then there's 2 listservs you want to access. The CSIS listserv will let you talk to other CSIS or CalPETS users that use the same system you do. So if you are a SACE user, you can talk to other SACE users. If you're a CSIS user, you can talk to other CSIS users. And then the CalPETS listserv, all the flash communications that come out, all the important announcements are distributed via flash, information about when the next training is available, so on and so forth. So you want to sign up for the CDE listserv. Okay, and so this is important to me. This is a way for you to feedback and comment on today's training. Suggestions, critiques, compliments, whatever it is, what would be beneficial to you, please complete the survey because we do review them, and things that are common or things that Martha deems important, we make changes and we're pretty responsive. We change them on the fly. So please complete the survey. And then last but not least, before we answer the remaining questions, we just want to take a time to thank all of you for attending today. Also, we want to thank you most importantly for all the hard work you're doing. We understand that this is not an ideal situation, not just the pandemic, but also the timelines, being that this is the initial EOY 4 and 3 in which you are involved in. And so many of you have some newfound stress that you're not accustomed to. And so we are here to support you. We are here to help you, but we do want to acknowledge your hard work and your efforts and say thank you.
And Nate, I did place the URL in the chat window. If you want to, people can click on that URL and go, and you want to use the SWD reporting and certification selection.
The URL to what, Marshall?
To the survey.
Okay, thank you. The survey's in the chat window. So if you've been looking at the Q&A, open the chat in your Zoom controls, click chat, and that'll open up. And then how can they get the question and answers, Marshall?
The question and answers will be available. I think me and Kyron talked about maybe putting a link from the user manual for them to be able to download it. So next week when you get the link for when the video is available, I will try to get both from last session and this session all together into one question and answer. It's going to be a spreadsheet, so you'll have your question on one side and the answer on the other side. It just takes a little while.
Okay, so thank you, Marshall. So that concludes today's training. So if you have questions remaining, please take this time to ask them while we have Brandy and Martha here. And Marshall, myself, Kyron, and I will assist as well as Sly as the questions come in.
Yeah, and this is an opportunity to actually get your questions answered live. So if you have them, put them in. So Donna, I see that that's the cert error you're getting for that particular student. Send in a ticket because based on what I'm seeing, that student, you shouldn't be getting that error, and actually they shouldn't be showing up on the reports, monitoring reports. Can multiple amendments be reported for the same meeting? Yes. Yes. Again, an amendment is, a formal amendment. There is a difference between making an amendment and correcting an error. Okay. And that, excuse me, that guidance is going to go out in a flash message that we're sending. But if you have, like, for example, somebody, there was a typo that was made on the record that's sent to CalPADS, but on the IEP, it's actually correct. If you need to correct something, what you need to actually do is delete that transaction and send up the new one. Amendments are really for when you're actually changing a student's IEP. But yes, you can submit multiple. And Kim is saying, she's talking about adults in transition. This is a really common question, folks. A lot of your students with disabilities that are on active IEPs, if they are still on an active IEP in the adult school, they have to be reported as enrolled in CalPADS, right? You will need enrollments for them if they are on active IEPs. So, Kim, yes, if they're on an active IEP, they're being served through an adult program, they need an enrollment in CalPADS. No problem. Okay, so sometimes when I try to create a transaction in SEDS, the system tells me there's already one existing, but when I look in CalPADS, there isn't a transaction. So how do I create one?
The duplicate. Sometimes the duplication is within the file that you're sending up, and sometimes it's being compared to what's in the ODS. So make sure that you do check inside, and it sounds like you did. So if you come across, you're trying to upload a record and we're sending back that it's a duplicate and you can't figure it out, send in a service ticket and we'll take a look at it.
Yeah, and the other thing is, it's really, Katrina, it's kind of unclear whether or not you're getting that error in SEDS or you're getting it in CalPADS. So if SEDS is giving you an error saying there's already a transaction, then you need to talk to SEDS. Oh, it's in SEDS, yeah. So that's a SEDS question, unfortunately. No problem. Can I add on speech to a try? So services and triennials, this is a question that was posed yesterday during the Q&A. Just to be really clear, triennial meetings are generally to reestablish eligibility for special education services. Annual meetings are for IEP development and identification of services that the student needs. Okay, so the services, SSRV records should not be attached to triennial records. They should be attached to annual meetings or, ISP meetings.
So the answer is no, you can't add speech to a try.
and CalPADS will let you know.
Yeah. That's where you get the 140 and 142s, right? Right.
That's, we have 140 and 142. How do we clean up these errors, or should I send in a ticket? So the 140 and 142s is because you're probably trying to attach services to a triennial. Boy, that generated a lot of questions, didn't it?
Yeah, and so we are going to write that up and send it out in the flash, how to clean that up. I would say wait for the flash, and if you still can't figure it out, then you send in a service ticket and we can help break it down for you, because we'll give you some hints on how to resolve the 140, 142. And I think recently we did clarify it with the special ed vendors as well, not to send up services associated to a triennial. So there may be some historical data that you had in the past that allowed that, but going forward, your vendors won't be providing that to CalPADS. So you'll start seeing less of those errors, I believe.
And then we've got, so what are the SPED folks supposed to talk to our student information system folks about? It's next to impossible to pin her down, but when we do, what are we supposed to talk about? So the data in CalPADS, you have to understand that you're looking at in your SPED reports is a combination of data that's coming from the student information system and from your SPED system. So there are dependencies on those things. So for example, if you can't get a SPED record and you're getting something called a GER5 error, which means you don't have ownership, it means that the student doesn't have an overlapping enrollment. And so you have to talk to your SIS person to make sure that their enrollment record is in there and correct so that you can get your SPED record up there. If the student's demographic profile is incorrect, their birth date is wrong, their enrollment start dates are incorrect, or they're enrolled at the wrong school from what you can tell. Those are things that you're going to have to talk to your SIS coordinators about, because that's where those data are coming from in those reports. You guys may think that you're sending up in the SPED record things like school of attendance and reporting LEA and things like that, but we don't use it. We don't use those pieces of information from your SPED records. We're actually using it from whatever's sent up from your student information system. So there is coordination that has to occur with your student information system coordinator.
And I would also add that they have been doing CalPads. Your SIS coordinator has likely been doing CalPads for some time, unless they're brand new to the position as well. But for somebody that has years of experience in CalPads, they can help you with a lot of, I don't know, methods of resolving errors. They may be different types of errors, but they can get you familiar with documentation. They're a good resource to collaborate with. And you have to coordinate about the approval of EOY 4 and EOY 3. They shouldn't be approving EOY 3 before EOY 4 is approved. And so just knowing how close you are to approving EOY 4, it helps them as they get close to wanting to approve EOY 3. So coordination is also helpful, the dialogue.
Yes. So Amy's asking if an amendment and an IEP, a meeting, an original meeting and an amendment can occur on the same day. So I guess my question is, well, the answer is yes, but what that looks like, Amy, when you send a record up to CalPads and based on the way you're submitting the records. So what I would do, first of all, is to create a transaction to for the original meeting, okay? And then you could send up an amendment meeting, which means and that amendment date could actually be the same date. And the only reason I know that is because I looked at a record that had that exact scenario where the amendment date was the same as the meeting date. So you can do that, but it's kind of how SEDS is, or whatever special education vendor is actually picking up those transactions. But we need both of those things. You need the original meeting and then another record reflecting the original meeting date and the amendment date. Which in this
Why
case,
would they be the same date though?
well, she's saying because apparently maybe the parent consented to one thing and then they had to make a change later in the day. Right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's possible, I suppose, but that's
right.
essentially how it would have to be done. Okay, reportable amendments. What is considered a reportable transaction? It's confusing since SACE generates the transactions, then how the SACE coordinator can send an amendment that needs to be reported. So SACE is basically, I believe that what SACE is doing is looking at our CalPads documentation to determine what a reportable amendment is. Okay, so there's certain fields, and the flash that's coming out within the next couple of days is going to identify those fields specifically for you. Okay, and actually it's in the CalPads file specifications, but we're making some updates to it, so I wouldn't refer to that. So look for the flash, and basically what that flash says is if you're making changes to any of these following components, then it requires an amendment and an amendment date. Okay, there are also certain components of the IEP that must be changed through a full IEP meeting. They cannot be changed in an amendment. So we're going to be outlining those as well in the flash. So anonymous attendee, please look at the flash. So we're having issues where SACE is attaching amendments to the most recent meeting, even if the most recent meeting was a triennial. They seem to be unclear how to resolve this issue. Actually, we just talked to them yesterday, Kevin, and they are aware of this issue and they will be resolving it. Okay, right. So we also know that the tri and the annual sometimes occur on the same date. And again, if you have that occurrence, then the services should only be attached to the annual. We've already communicated this to SACE. They will be working on it. Great. Okay. Let's see. So if a speech student has been receiving speech for several years and RSP is added, this service is added through their annual meeting. Yeah, but a service could also be, I believe, added through an amendment. I was surprised to hear we need to include IFSPs in our viewing our CalPADS reports. Does SELPA submit that on our behalf if they serve our pre-K kiddos? So SELPAs do not submit data unless you have given them LEA level access. So somebody is submitting your IFSP kids, but very likely it's probably your county offices of education.
Track that one down, anonymous.
Yeah. So we're unable to hold annual and triennial meeting together. We're holding our annuals now, but the triennials are delayed, which is fine. If there are service changes that are tied to the triennial evaluation, we're unable to upload SSRVs for triennials, which causes a cert error in CalPADS. So, I mean, at that point, what you could do, so you could go ahead and you submit up your annual record, and then if based on the triennial evaluation, changes to services need to be made, what you could do is do an amendment to your annual meeting and then submit the services associated with that annual meeting.
Which is what our SEDS vendors are going to start doing. They're no longer going to associate services to triennials.
Right. What do we do for approval? Say we have to run all reports in SACE. Oh, you mean what do you? How do you certify your data? There is a button.
You have to have the EOY 4 reports role, and then you go into the certification status page and you go to EOY 4, and then you have to click on each of those reports so it gets a green check box. And once those reports, and you looked at those reports and you know that they're accurate, and then a green check box appears, and when all of the reports have a green check box, you can push a button that says approve. But if you don't have the reports with a green check box, that means you haven't reviewed them, and therefore you cannot do the approval. And once you do the approval, hitting that button, then it will notify your SELPA that you're ready for them to do their approval.
And prior to doing any of the report review or approving, you have to ensure that all your certification fatal errors have been cleared. And we have a recording on the YouTube channel for end of year 4, which this process is demonstrated for you. So we apologize we didn't get to that today, but the process is demonstrated if you just go to the YouTube channel and search for EOY 4.
Can we do that? Can we demo the YouTube channel? Navigate to that?
Yes, we can.
While Brandy continues to, if you guys can watch the screen and listen to Brandy.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. So Caroline Davila, I'm looking at your question. Can you send up a service ticket, please? Because this one is going to get a little tricky. So I just want to make sure that I give you the correct answer, and I'd have to look at the SSID, the SSIDs in question. So could you submit up a service ticket, please? Okay, so if we use the triennial to serve as both the tri and the annual, do we send a 20 and a 40? Yes, right? The 20 and the 40 would be on the same date. And in some of your special education systems, essentially what you're doing is you're identifying that the triennial and the annual are falling on that same date, and then your vendor actually creates 2 records. If we use the triennial to serve, if an IEP meeting was held in May, but the services do not start until the new school year, should the plan type be changed to 300? No, okay, because what you're actually reporting in that IEP are the services that have been prescribed in the IEP, not necessarily the IEP that, or the services that the student has received, right? So you should be reporting the services associated with that IEP in May, even if the student doesn't start receiving those services until August.
That is right, Brandy. This is Joe. So basically, this is a kind of like common question because the services would start like next August. However, what you have to they have to understand that once they hold the meeting and the parental eligibility was determined already, that would be the start of the entry date. So basically, you shouldn't be sending a pending because the actual services would start in August, for instance. They should actually start when the parent and you guys decided that the kid is eligible for a plan.
Right. Thanks, Joe. How do you recommend we proceed with IEP meetings where the meeting is a try and other suspected areas of disability have been assessed and it was determined that the student is eligible? If the annual IEP has already been held, are we supposed to call the subsequent try an annual two, even though there's already a current annual IEP? So you've held an annual. So Joe, I wonder if you can answer a question for me. Can they actually hold a triennial meeting earlier than every 3 years?
Yeah, at least it could be held. So the statutes, I believe, is at least every 3 years. And even with the annual, you could actually hold an annual obviously prior a year or, as often as you could. That goes the same way with the eligibility, but at least you could, the word is at least, you have a eligibility determination every 3 years.
Right. So if you had to, so I'm assuming that you're asking, so you want to do another evaluation or a redetermination of eligibility because you suspect there are additional disabilities. It sounds like you don't have to wait to hold an annual meeting. You could actually do a try before it's actually due. Would that
Absolutely.
be accurate? Okay.
That would be an accurate depiction.
Brandy, on this particular question, the fact that they already held their IEP and they determined that there was other areas of disability, wouldn't they just do an amendment rather than a try?
Yeah, so generally disability codes, primary disabilities and secondary disabilities, that most times requires a full IEP meeting. So it's not really, the only time you should actually be changing disability codes through an amendment is actually when that disability code has to be changed because the student age changes, right? So for example, they're 3 years old or between 3 and 5, you can have established medical disability as their primary disability, but after a certain age, you have to change it to something else. And so there are certain times when you can change those codes because the student age changes. But if you're actually determining that the student has another primary disability, that's going to drive a whole set of other things, right? What are the services that have to be provided to address that particular primary disability? And so I don't know that it can be done through an amendment, is all I'm saying.
Got it.
That is correct, Brandy. And to make to be more exact, the primary disability should actually be established when you did the annual IEP and the triennial eligibility determination, the initial one, and certain amendments could only happen. Yes. Can you guys hear me?
I hear them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think it was my computer.
Right.
Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you guys are doing a tremendous job, by the way. That's why I was just in awe and silent most of the time. But anyway, the disability, circumstances where amendments could happen are what Brandy mentioned. Circumstances would be like, EMD or some solely low incidents that would have been transitioned during the age changes, mainly the transition ages from 2 to 3 when it's Part C to B and those kind of issues. That's why we just allow amendments, most specifically for secondary disability, by the way. And mainly a lot of the primary disabilities should have been established during their eligibility determination or initial evaluation for determination eligibility.
Okay. So if the child is found ineligible after initial evaluation, what exit code do we use to exit them from CalPADS? So Maribel, I'm assuming that you're talking about what school exit codes, so that if they're ineligible, obviously in the SPED record, you would identify with them with a plan type 700, which is ineligible, right? But on their enrollment record, it depends on what enrollment status you've used for that student. So if you've used an enrollment status 50 because the student's attending a private school or they're in the infant program, then you would use E170. But if they're a primary enrollment, meaning they're in grades kindergarten through 12th grade, they're owned by your district and they're enrolled in a school, then you could use N470, which is a no-show exit code. Okay, if I have students that will be attending a county program for the 2021 school year, do those records need to be transferred prior to July 1st or after July? So Kimberly, I'm assuming you mean transferred in your special education data system. What I would do is I would wait until your end of year reporting is, okay? Because if you transfer those students now, it may affect your ability to report their SPED records. Now, having said that, if everything that you needed to get up for those students, because that was effective in 1920, is already in CalPads, then you should be okay. Do we need violations for restraints for MPS students?
No.
Yeah, only, it doesn't require that it's associated with an ed code violation, Heidi. If an annual or a triennial is in need, and just let me know when you want me to stop, you guys. Right?
Well, you still got 200 people listening, Brandy, so
okay, well, that's good.
if you got the time.
Yeah, I don't have anything scheduled this afternoon. So if an annual or triennial is in need of a part 2 meeting, oh yeah, this, I actually just forwarded this question on to the special education office. So we have to kind of get some guidance because from what I understand, you have the initial IEP meeting, but the parent doesn't consent at that point. You're going to need a follow-up meeting. So if you're able to obtain parental consent on that offer of FAPE prior to the amendment window closing in CalPads, which is 8/28, okay, you can, once that meeting is part 2 meeting is held, you go ahead and hold a meeting and you send up the transaction, and the date that gets reflected is the original meeting date, okay? As long as the parent has consented. But what happens if if that part 2 meeting doesn't get held by August 28th? Do you report that student as a pending because the IEP hasn't been finalized? And so this is where the questions come in, and I need Joe and Shiloh to kind of weigh in on it. Because if the parent
Brandy,
has not consented, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so when you're talking about consented, basically, obviously you consented for the plan, right?
Yes, they've accepted the offer of FAPE.
Right. So if obviously you don't have the consent, then you obviously won't have a plan till they consent. So that makes sense that it should be a pending for that moment. However, we have some directions. If you already got the consent, and would that be a pending if, let's say, you know, the signatures are still like on the way or something to that effect, you could use the original meeting date already there because you've already gotten the actual consent from the parent, you know, and you're just, you know, waiting for formality for that purposes.
Right. And a lot of you were asking, well, is June 30? I mean, if I don't get parental consent by June 30, do I just send them up as a pending? And so I would say, if you don't get that consent, or that part 2 meeting doesn't happen before the amendment window closes, then do that. Then send up a pending record. Otherwise, just wait. And if that meeting is held, this part 2 meeting is held, you know, before August 28th, then you can send up that original meeting record, because now the parent has accepted offer of FAPE. Or let's say they decline, right? They decline services. Then you could actually send up the record indicating that they were eligible, but the parent declined.
That's a good point, Brandy. You have till August to
Yeah.
actually submit that. It doesn't have to be exactly the June 30th deadline.
But you don't have till August 28th because that data has to be reflected in a revision and they take overnight. And so, give yourself a week before the 28th to make a decision. Do I go with what I have or do I wait, kind of thing? That's a last minute thing. It could hold everything up in EOY 4.
No, that's right.
Okay. Yeah. So we get this question all the time too. So if an initial IEP is held on February 2nd, parent did not sign it until May 30th, and the services don't start till 8/17, what is the entry date? 5:30.
5:30, right?
Yeah.
That's right, 5:30.
When they sign
Even though the actual services won't start till August 17th. So that's kind of like one of our FAQs, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So I should have specified if the annual was held and a try was held after the annual due to COVID, we held the annual in March to meet compliance, and because we still needed assessments completed, the try wasn't held with the annual, which is fine. During the try in May, we determined the student was eligible for OT and PT. We need to add the services, but the annual was already held and affirmed. So do we call the try also, what do we call the try? Also an annual, even though the annual was held 2 months earlier. Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is that the triennial is the triennial record. Submit that record. So what it sounds like is there was the need for the addition of services. So what you could do is submit a subsequent amendment to the annual. And Joe, does that sound like? Yeah,
that's
you could
accurate. And
right.
I believe that we discussed this with SEDS. This was actually presented to us yesterday, I believe, when we clarified to SEDS that the subsequent amendment needs to be tied with the annual, not with the try, even though the try was held 2 months right after, I believe.
Right. So you would submit the try record, and then you would submit a subsequent amendment to the prior annual and attach the new OT and PT services to that and the amended annual.
That's exactly correct.
Okay. For those meetings that are held in the 1920, but implementation entry date is August, we were advised to send them as 800. Ooh, who said that? Yeah, I don't think that's accurate. If right?
Yes, that's not accurate. Again, we did actually had some talks with another vendor, and they presented this issue, and I think we clarified this, and they'll rectify this issue. Hopefully, that's the same vendor that you're using, Diana.
And you know what, Diana, the thing is, when you have a meeting and the parent agrees to the offer of FAPE, there are services that are prescribed in that offer of FAPE. Even though those services have not started yet, what you're actually reporting in CalPADS is what's reflected on the IEP, not actually what ends up getting implemented, right? IEP implementation is a whole separate ball of wax. Okay, but in reality, there are exceptions to what you're describing about eligibility. Yeah, there's always exceptions. Once I entered the world of special education, I realized that there is always an exception for everything. So yes, Katie, you're right. Okay, so it's an assessment for an incoming preschooler. And Maribel, I do not remember your prior question, so I apologize, but you said thank you, so maybe I answered it. Okay. You had mentioned earlier that a service cannot be added to a triennial. I'm not sure if I understood that correctly, because when the assessment is done to continue in eligibility, it may be discovered that the child, right. Okay, folks, what we're talking about is you may do these things through a triennial meeting. However, in CalPADS, when you send up service records, if you try to send them up with the same meeting or amendment identifier as your triennial meeting, you're going to get an error. It's going to say, don't do that. So if you have changed the services that were prescribed in the student's annual, most recent annual IEP, then submit a subsequent amendment to annual with those amended services, and do not try to attach it to the try. Okay, oh, sorry, Corey Stacy, Brandy, plan type for ineligible 900. Okay, yeah, you know what, Corey, thank you for correcting me. So ineligible is 900. 700 is for students who qualified but declined to attend private school. So thank you for correcting me. I don't have them quite memorized yet. When should incoming ninth graders be rolled over into the high school in SEDS? I honestly, like I said, I would wait to confirm that you've submitted all data associated with those kids for the 2019-20 academic year, and you've confirmed that it's correct. Once you've confirmed that that's okay, then I would transfer them in SEDS, because there may be issues with accessing or sending up transactions for students once you don't own them anymore. Okay, so just verify that all of the data for your matriculating kids are correct in CalPADS before you transfer them in SEDS, because you don't want any issues. CalPADS error list says it throws an error if changing disability 1 or 2 is an amendment. Yeah, SPED 439. So Dal, we're making changes to 439 and 438, I think it is. It's actually 438, I believe.
Yeah.
438 and 441, we're making changes to those because of this. So just stay tuned. The Flash is going to address this. Okay, my question was in reference to an annual or triennial, not an initial. I can't remember your question.
And there may be multiple anonymous people.
Yeah, I know.
That's why it really helps if we knew who you were.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So if the child has a SPED referral in CalPADS and SPED determines that the student doesn't need to continue the process into special education, what can be used to remove or exit the student from SPED and CalPADS? What I'm hearing, Flanell, is that the student was referred, but the parent didn't consent to initial evaluation. If the parent never consented, the district doesn't really have a responsibility to evaluate them. Right? You have to get parental consent, and then once you receive parental consent, then that 60-day timeline starts for their initial evaluation. So if they did receive parental consent, which is actually the only way you can actually get the record up into CalPADS, then you have a problem. Then you have to actually get, if they haven't been initially evaluated. That's a good question, Joe. Do you know the answer to that question?
Yeah, so basically I think the issue is they sent a referral record to CalPADS, and Flash 161, by the way, does specify the details of how to actually submit or obtain an SSID. Is when you start it, when you have the initial parental consent for initial evaluation. So in this regard, if you already actually had a referral and you erroneously submitted or obtained an SSID and submit this to CalPADS, then this is treated as an error. You should delete this record, because Flash 161 specifies clearly that you should actually start submitting or obtaining SSID once you obtain a parental consent for initial evaluation.
So what if they have, I guess my question, Joe, is they've obtained, let's just say, hypothetically say that they've obtained parental consent, okay? Which is the only way it could actually even get up into CalPADS, is if they have a parental consent date, right?
Right.
They get a parental consent date, but guess what? The parent never shows, right? So let's say they send a pending record, they have a consent date, there's a pending record in CalPADS, but nothing ever happens. The parent no longer wants to do anything. How do you get rid of that record? Because you can't exit them because they never started.
Right. So
they were never evaluated.
Yeah, most likely this would either be a pending record, right? Because mainly hasn't happened yet. But then basically there's no eligibility process that was actually transpired. So
Right.
I would assume that this should be deleted from the ODS.
So, but the enrollment
However,
would be
though-
there. The enrollment would have existed.
The enrollment would have existed.
So you
He's
could-
asking how to exit him from SPED.
So you just remove the SPED record from CalPADS with the delete?
You could, but if you've created their initial enrollment record in CalPADS, like the very first one, you're not going to be able to delete it.
Right. And
So-
470?
This is a really interesting question, because if you have sent up pending records, I mean, realistically, guys, until the student has been initially evaluated, really pending records your systems are generating them as soon as there's a parental consent date. That's what's happening. And then sometimes those transactions are being sent up. But if for whatever reason the parent just is not wanting to make the kid available for evaluation, we're going to have to get back to you, because I don't know. They never entered the program, so I don't know. This
that
is
could
good.
be that could be circumstantial there, Brandy. Mainly that could be an act where the parent actually implicitly withdraws. So that could be a plan type 700. But then
Right.
again,
But can they submit that plan type? Oh, so plan type 700. Well, but
700 would be my
they were never
option.
assessed, though. They were never evaluated. So how can you make that determination?
So when you determine, I mean, and again, I think Flanell, please submit a service ticket in this regard. This is a real unusual circumstance. We could actually talk it, over more once you submit that ticket. Most likely, suggestions that I could actually give is obviously when you determine that the parent refused or withdrew or implicitly withdraw the plan or did not accept the plan, that would be the date that you should actually be used there, and then use the plan type 700. Then again, I just want to make sure that we would confirm this response back to our team again with Shallow and the rest. So please send the service ticket, okay?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, so if they're in preschool getting speech and going to kindergarten not in our district, how do I exit them? Okay, so first of all, the district that should be reporting their SPED record and their enrollment record is the district where they're going to school. Okay, so your district should not have reported an enrollment for them, because that's not where they're going to school, even though you're providing the SPED services. So the district where they attend kindergarten should report not only their enrollment record, but should also report their SPED record. And when you say how to exit them, I'm assuming you mean exit their SPED record or exit their enrollment record. I need clarification on that. The 800 was CSIS.
So yeah, Diana, that is correct. We reach out to CSIS and we clarify this issue. So please be patient with their correction. I believe they will be doing some corrections for this.
Okay, so is it possible to email you directly with additional questions regarding your response to my annual triennial scenario? Yeah, so what I would do is, again, send in a service ticket, and then you can either put Joe Tan's name in the ticket and my name in the ticket, and we can try and address the issues together. So that's the best thing to do. If you have really, really specific scenarios, just submit a ticket and we'll get back to you. Okay, yeah, the enrollment was submitted to CalPADS as well. Yeah, that's just submit a ticket, Flanell. Okay, parents do revoke consent prior to initial evaluation. Yeah, I agree, Peter. We have to come up with some sort of guidance for this. Okay.
Wow. Okay, got him, Brandy.
Yes, right? I'm glad.
277 answered questions.
Wow, that's a lot. And with from last seminar too. So webinar.
Well, and a lot were done live. So
Yeah.
Right.
So what's on the screen?
Are you guys seeing the CSIS
Yes.
website? Okay.
I needed somebody to say that.
Sorry about that. I missed that segue. But yes, there was questions in there about how to submit a service request ticket. So the best way is go to the CSIS website. And once you get there, you can go to support and contact us. And in the center of the screen, it says get help on CalPads. You'll click that and that will bring up the service request ticket. That's the fastest way to get in touch with us and relay the information accurately to us. So you want to do that. Also, I think you may have seen me demonstrating the CSIS YouTube channel. We redesigned it a little bit, made it more easier for you guys to actually find information, find the videos. So if you just go to the homepage, once you get on the homepage, just scroll down. We have all, Sly and I spent some time and we put all the playlist right on the home screen for you, so you don't have to go to playlists or do a search. But if you need to find something, use this little icon here for search and say we were talking about the MPS information. Just type in MPS and it will bring it up for you. So those are some ways you can get around and find information, reference information that you want. And the user manual, you did see that. The user manual is a big area where you can do that.
Hey, also, Marshall, you can get access to the CalPads service desk forum inside of CalPads under the help menu.
That's
yeah,
true.
but being this they're SEDS users, perhaps they would be in their system, not CalPads. So
yeah, and you
yeah,
can also
Good
get
point. Good
yeah,
point.
poignant.
yeah, you can also get help through the this fresh off the press. You can get help right there where it says where to get support. You can go from the CalPads user manual and find the information, a lot of information there, plus get support from that way too. Okay, guys, it's almost 1 o'clock.
So, I'll leave it to you all. And
Good job today.
Oh yeah, there is one question. Can we find the recording? The recording will show up on the YouTube channel, and give me at least a week to get through it because it is kind of long. So I'll try to get it out there by the end of next week if I can.
But it needs closed captioning.
Yes, it needs closed captioning, and I got an ideal way of
Expediting that, huh? Okay.
Yeah, just for all you there, if there is some, printing on the closed caption, say it says instead of saying spelled out CalPads, it might say that might miss once or twice. Cal may say CalPads like that. Broken out.
Cow, C-O-W.
yeah, because there's a lot of that in there. But I have an application that's supposed to help get through that for me. So with that,
Thank you, everybody, for sticking around.
thank you guys. Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.